Do not call 911. That is what some residents in California are being told right now. And this is also happening in Georgia. A very similar situation is happening. People are waiting on the lines for hours and hours, waiting for ambulances to get help. This is a breakdown of our emergency services. And this is also a supply chain breakdown. Believe it or not, this is highly interconnected with the supply chain and the problems we're having there. All right. So let's dive into what's happening. And this just is another example of how you cannot rely on emergency services in a real emergency. When there's a real emergency, you you can't call emergency services. They're even saying don't call because they're having their own emergency right now. All right. Look at New York and Buffalo. There was an emergency, and the emergency services couldn't get to where they needed to be because the roads were blocked by snow. There was a snow emergency, a weather emergency that took them out too. So, whenever there's a real, actual emergency, you will not be able to depend on emergency services. That's just how it typically is, and you need to be prepared. All right, so let's get into what's going on. California, this is happening in Georgia as well too. We will get into that in just a second. California County urges residents to only call 911 for true emergencies. All right, this is the point we're getting to. California, one of the most prosperous states in the world. Their GDP is dwarfs many countries. It's one of the top, I believe, top 5, 10 GDPs in the entire world is California, competing with countries in Europe all over the place. And they cannot respond to emergency calls because of funding and supply chain breakdowns. We will get into both of these issues, and we will get into Georgia, what's happening there. So, as the ambulance shortage continues across the country, a California county is urging residents not to call 911 unless it's a true emergency. There are a number of different circumstances in our jurisdiction that we have down to zero ambulances available to be able to respond out to those life-saving incidents. Contra Costa County Fire Captain Steve Aubert told ABC 7. All right, so even saying zero ambulances available to be able to respond out to those life-saving incidences. And it's one of these things we want to be able to depend on this. We want our society to be dependable, but we have to be realistic and we have to be prepared ourselves as well too, because in a real emergency, societal emergency, supply chain breakdown, funding breakdown, personnel breakdown, you cannot rely on the emergency services. And it says a county only has 30 ambulances to respond to emergencies, and that's not enough. Quote, our ambulances services have been impacted by the by recent events that are going on, but also a large use of ambulance services just for normal calls going to the hospital. So they were also saying that a lot of people are wasting resources, they think as well. And they said they should only call if they're experiencing real issues like severe chest pain, breathing, all this other stuff. And the way they updated people is through Twitter. So it's one of these things that it's kind of crazy. They just tweet out, "Hey, you can't call 911 anymore in California in this county," and Contra Costa County, sorry, don't call 911 anymore. They just tweeted out. Like, how are people supposed to know this? By the way, follow me on Twitter if you do have Twitter. But I'm not following my local fire department. Maybe I should be, because this is what they do. They just tweet out this stuff and they expect people to know what's happening. All right, a very similar situation is happening in Georgia. People are waiting for hours and hours for ambulances, and a director is sounding the alarm on the supply chain issues as well, and sounding the alarm on why we can't get ambulances. So it's an EMS director's worst nightmare. Georgia EMS director sounds alarm on shortages. So this is happening in Georgia as well too. It says across the state the alarms are blaring. It says with 12 ambulances in the fleet operating 24 hours and 5 frontline ambulances with over 200,000 miles, Cobb says he worries about the wear and tear of using them so often. It's a growing problem, according to Fire Chief David Forrester, that extends as far as southwest Georgia, and he said it isn't easily solved by buying more ambulances. So there's a funding issue, but there's also a supply chain issue as well. They can get funding, but they can't even get the ambulances for years out in advance. Quote, all of the auto manufacturers, from what we've been told, that sold chassis for a short period of time, the ambulance builders have bought them for sold units. So there are no ambulances that are sitting out there new, completely ready to be sold. So there's been this chassis shortage for the ambulances, he's saying, and that there's no new ambulances. They all have to be built new to order. The process takes about 2 years from the time you order them to the time you get them back, Forrester explained. All right, so this is happening in Georgia as well. This is nationwide. I saw Texas is having EMS issues. They are having problems getting personnel to operate the ambulances. Also in Ohio, I saw they're having problems. They're having shortages of ambulance operators, and they cannot operate at the same capacity that they normally do there either. And Texas, I believe, just passed a bill to address it, to try to get more funding for these people. And here's a story that was a couple months ago out of Georgia as well. 2 hours too long. Macon mother waits 2 hours for an ambulance to save her daughter. I read the details. I didn't want to post all of it, but everyone's okay, it looks like. But imagine being in an emergency and waiting 2 hours. The typical wait time is already, 5 to 10 minutes to 15 to 20 minutes in some areas. But typical wait time for police response is anywhere from 5 to 10 to 15 minutes in the United States. And that's if you're lucky. That's if you're in a city that has police readily available near you. If you're more rural, it could take a lot longer. And this mother was dealing with an emergency and had to wait over 2 hours for a ambulance to respond to help her daughter. All right, so it's one of these things. When there's an actual emergency, they're dealing with their own emergency. There's a supply chain emergency right now. I've been covering this for months and months. One of my first videos that you guys really latched onto was talking about the supply chain issues with truckers right now and how they are running into all these problems getting parts and getting their trucks repaired. Very similar situation is happening with the ambulances, but there's even less ambulances and it's more localized. And these places, they only have, like you said, a dozen ambulances with 200,000 miles, and there's not much they can do. It's not a federal thing. It's more local, your ambulance. And if they have issues, there's nothing they can do. You have to wait years to get new ambulances to meet the capacity that they have there. So let me know what you think. Are you in California? Are you in Georgia? Any areas? This was in Texas and Ohio. I saw they're having paramedic issues to getting people to operate the ambulances there. So let me know what you guys think about all this. This is happening in the UK. The military was on the streets in the UK operating the ambulances, driving them, because they were on strike and there was a shortage of ambulance drivers there. All right, so we could see similar situations where the military, the National Guard, whatever, federal, state police start filling in the gaps, start using their vehicles for emergency services and stuff like this. This is what always happens. There's a deterioration of society, and the feds and the military and the National Guard and everything always steps in. It's always what happens. Sometimes it's good, but sometimes it's one of these things that, why do we have to get to this point? All right, so let me know what you think about this. Did you hear about this story? Hit that thumbs up, hit that like, hit that sub if you didn't hear about it. Thank you guys for watching, and you have a big old blessed day.